You are required to move to economy class immediately. Our VIP guests can sit here. Stay quiet and cooperate, otherwise I will call security.
You need to move from that seat immediately, sir. Get up now. The words did not just fall into the quiet cabin of Flight 447. They cut through the low hum of the air conditioning like a cold blade. It was a Wednesday afternoon at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport, and every single passenger within earshot suddenly froze. A businessman in seat 1C stopped mid-scroll on his tablet. An elderly woman adjusted her glasses, her eyes darting toward the front row. Nobody said a word. Nobody moved. They all just watched a man get treated like he did not belong in the very seat he had paid for. The space felt instantly suffocating, filled with that heavy, collective silence where people choose to look away rather than look at the truth right in front of them. At first glance, Nathan Whitmore did not look like the kind of man who could make an entire airline nervous. He was 49 years old, tall but not imposing, resting quietly in seat 1A. He wore a simple navy blazer over a plain gray t-shirt, dark jeans, and a pair of polished but well-traveled brown loafers. There was no gold watch flashing on his wrist to demand attention. No sharp-suited assistant stood behind him, shuffling important papers. No private security team had cleared a path for him through the crowded terminal. He carried only a single black rolling suitcase, a worn leather briefcase tucked near his feet, and the quiet, bone-deep exhaustion of a man who had spent the last 14 months closing a deal that would change the future of his industry. Outside the thick glass of the cabin window, the Texas sky was a flat, heavy gray, and a sudden drizzle began to dot the window pane in tiny silver beads. Inside, the air smelled faintly of leather, citrus cleaner, and high-altitude rain. Nathan sat perfectly still, his long fingers resting on the armrest. He did not blink. He did not jump up in anger. He had learned long ago to watch people before they watched him, a survival habit built over decades, spent in upscale hotel lobbies, corporate conference rooms, and exclusive airport lounges. These were places where men who looked like him were frequently noticed, but rarely recognized for who they actually were. Sometimes people saw the expensive suit before they saw the man, and sometimes they saw the man and completely refused to respect his presence. Nathan knew both feelings with a cold, absolute certainty. His phone buzzed softly in his palm. The screen lit up with a brief message from Daniel Harper, his chief operating officer. It read, "Phoenix contract signed. Final documents uploaded. Congratulations, boss." Nathan stared at the glowing text for 2 seconds. His expression did not change, but the tension in his shoulders softened just a fraction. That single contract represented over 14 months of brutal negotiations, delayed conference calls, midnight legal revisions, and immense, quiet pressure. It was the largest expansion deal Whitmore Systems had ever finalized. Yet, to the travelers walking past him in the aisle, he was just another middle-aged black man sitting in a premium cabin, an anomaly to be questioned. Nathan preferred it that way. He believed in quiet power. He had built his firm from a cramped, rented office with second-hand desks into one of the most trusted logistics software companies in the country. Their platforms managed staffing, crew allocation, and maintenance tracking for major carriers. In fact, Blue Ridge Airways, the very airline he was currently sitting on, ran its entire domestic network on software his company had designed. Their operational backbone belonged to him, but the crew in the galley did not know his name. The boarding line slowed down behind the heavy blue curtains separating the cabins. Emily Parker, the lead flight attendant, stood directly over Nathan. She was in her mid-30-year-old range, her neat brown hair pinned back into a flawless bun, her uniform pressed so sharply it looked new. She held a digital tablet tightly against her chest, her lips pressed into a tight, professional smirk. It was the kind of look people give when they already know they are about to do something profoundly unfair. She glanced over her shoulder toward the galley, where a younger man stood waiting. He was 28, tall, sandy-haired, with expensive designer sunglasses resting carelessly on top of his head. He wore a pale blue button-down shirt, with the sleeves rolled up just enough to look casual, but not accidental. He did not look at the seat numbers. He looked at Nathan, his jaw tightening for half a second. It was the look of someone who believed the entire world should rearrange itself before he ever had to ask twice. Mr. Whitmore, Emily said, her voice dropping into a low, forced sweetness. We are going to need you to switch seats for a moment. There has been a clerical seating mix-up, and another passenger has been assigned to this row. Nathan looked up from his phone, his dark eyes steady and completely unblinking. For a moment? He asked softly. Emily nodded quickly, her fingers tapping nervously against her tablet. I understand your ticket says 1A, sir, but this gentleman was expecting this specific position today. He is one of our most frequent VIP flyers, a platinum executive member, and it would really help our schedule if you could cooperate. Nathan turned his head slowly to look at the young man. The man did not offer an apology. He did not say, excuse me. He just gave Nathan a small, cold smile, the kind a wealthy man gives when a valet brings the wrong car. Nathan looked back at the flight attendant. What is his assigned seat? He asked. Emily swallowed hard, her eyes darting away. It appears he is assigned to seat 3C, she muttered. Then 3C is his seat, Nathan said cleanly. The words were not loud, but they carried the weight of an anchor hitting the floor. Across the narrow aisle, the silver-haired woman paused her hands over her knitting bag. She looked at Emily, then at Nathan, her face showing a deep, tired recognition. She had lived long enough to know exactly what was happening under the guise of customer service. Emily's smile tightened until her lips were a thin line. 3C is still first class, Mr. Whitmore. Same service, same luxury. We would really appreciate your flexibility. Flexibility. Nathan had heard that word in too many rooms. In offices where executives wanted him to accept less equity. In contract meetings where clients expected immediate delivery, but delayed payment. In private clubs where someone called his success impressive, then asked who had really written the code. Flexibility almost always meant one person giving up their basic dignity so that another person could remain comfortable. Nathan placed his boarding pass firmly on his lap. I booked this seat weeks ago, he said. I paid full price for this seat. I boarded when my group was called, and I sat exactly where my paper told me to sit. No one is disputing that, sir, Emily snapped, her professional patience wearing thin. Then why are we having this conversation? Nathan asked. A heavy, frozen silence opened up between them. The sandy-haired man finally stepped forward into the row, his loafers clicking sharply on the carpet. Look, man, he said with a dry chuckle, I fly this specific route every week. 1A is kind of my spot. Nathan studied his face. The kid was maybe 31. He possessed the unearned confidence of someone who had never been told no in public. Your spot? Nathan asked. Yeah, Tyler Prescott, Platinum Executive Tier, the man said, gesturing vaguely toward the cabin. I am sure they can take care of you somewhere further back. It was nothing personal, Tyler added thinly. Nathan did not move an inch. It becomes personal when you ask a stranger to surrender what he rightfully purchased, because you prefer it, Nathan said. A few more heads turned in row 2. Emily's face flushed deep red. Gentlemen, please, we are just trying to get everyone settled. Then settle him in row 3, Nathan said. The older woman across the aisle finally spoke up, her voice steady and clear. That seems entirely reasonable to me. Emily turned toward her, startled. Ma'am, we have the situation under control. No, the woman said firmly, you are asking the wrong man to move. Tyler exhaled sharply through his nose, his fingers tapping against his suitcase handle in a rapid, impatient rhythm. Tap, tap, tap. Emily bent closer to Nathan, her voice dropping into a harsh whisper. Mr. Whitmore, I do not want this to become an issue. Nathan looked at her for one long, suffocating second. It already is, he said. He leaned back into the leather cushion, his face as calm as carved stone. I am not moving. Behind the curtain, the boarding line slowed to a crawl. The cabin lights hummed softly overhead. Emily straightened her spine, her expression turning clipped and icy. All right, Mr. Whitmore, she said. We will see what we can do. She turned on her heel, her shoes clicking loudly as she marched toward the front galley, leaving a storm of unspoken tension in her wake. The blue curtain swung shut behind Emily Parker, its heavy fabric cutting off the view of the galley, but it could not dampen the sharp sound of whispered voices. Nathan Whitmore did not strain to listen. He did not need to. He simply sat in seat 1A, his eyes fixed on the rain sliding down the window pane, his breathing shallow and completely controlled. 2 feet away, the space felt intensely small. Tyler Prescott remained in the aisle, his fingers hooked into his pockets, his leather shoe tapping a restless rhythm against the floor. Taps, tap, tap. It was a shallow sound. It was the sound of a man who expected a minor obstacle to dissolve by the sheer weight of his presence. He glanced down at Nathan, his eyes tracking the faded collar of the gray t-shirt, the lack of jewelry, the worn briefcase below. Tyler let out a short puff of air through his nose, turning his head back toward the galley with an explicit look of disgust. The curtain parted again. Ryan Brooks stepped through, his broad shoulders filling the narrow aisle. He was a senior flight attendant, his uniform immaculate, his posture rigid with the defensive authority of a man who believed a company badge turned a personal preference into an absolute rule. He stopped directly beside Nathan's row, his head resting heavily on the luggage bin above. "Mr. Whitmore," Ryan said, his voice dropping into that quiet, smooth register designed to sound professional, but carrying a distinct undercurrent of pressure. Nathan looked up, his gaze steady, calm as stone. "Yes," he replied. Ryan shifted his weight, his eyes measuring Nathan in a split second, taking in the casual clothes, the lack of an entourage, the complete stillness. "I understand there is some confusion regarding Seat 1A, Ryan said, his eyes scanning the nearby passengers to gauge their attention. "There is no confusion," Nathan said, his tone flat, even, and completely unchecked. "My boarding pass says 1A. Ryan smiled without a single ounce of genuine warmth. "I hear you, sir, but we have a priority customer who was expecting this exact configuration today, and we need to resolve this seating matter before we can officially close the cabin door." Nathan turned his head slightly, his gaze moving past Ryan to look at Tyler Prescott. Tyler stood near the metal counter of the galley, his arms tightly crossed over his chest, his sandy hair slightly damp from the airport drizzle. His designer sunglasses still sat on top of his head like a tiny crown of privilege. He looked intensely annoyed now, like a man whose golf reservation had been delayed by an unexpected storm. Nathan looked back at Ryan. "Is there a safety issue with my sitting in this seat?" Nathan asked, his voice cutting through the soft hum of the cabin air vents. Ryan paused, his jaw tightening just a fraction. "No, sir. Is there a federal regulation that requires me to vacate this position?" Nathan asked. Another pause followed, heavier this time. "No, sir," Ryan said, his voice tightening. "But crew members do have full discretion over cabin seating when operational needs require a sudden adjustment." "Operational needs," Nathan repeated, letting the words hang in the cool air of the first-class cabin. Across the aisle, Margaret Ellis stopped rearranging her silver hair. She lowered her knitting needles into her lap and turned her head completely toward the crew. The middle-aged businessman in row 2 lowered his newspaper, his eyes wide. Even the passenger behind Tyler leaned out into the aisle to capture the exchange. The entire cabin was tuning in, the silence turning brittle. Nathan looked at Ryan and spoke with a low, controlled precision. "What exactly is the operational need?" Ryan's nostrils flared, his hand tightening on the edge of the seat structure. "We are simply trying to accommodate a highly valued customer," Ryan said. Nathan nodded once, his face unblinking. "Then say that," Nathan said. Ryan blinked, his professional mask slipping. "Excuse me?" Ryan asked. "Say you are asking me to move from a seat I paid for because you value him more," Nathan said. The words fell like heavy weights into the quiet space. Emily Parker looked down at her digital tablet, her cheeks flushing a deep crimson. Tyler's eyes narrowed into slits. Somewhere in row 4, a passenger let out a long, slow breath. Ryan straightened his spine, his hands dropping to his sides. "Sir, there is no need to characterize our service policy in that manner." "But that is exactly what it is," Nathan said, his voice remaining level, completely devoid of fear or hesitation. Margaret Ellis spoke up again, her voice steady, carrying the quiet strength of a woman who has spent her life watching people stay silent when they should have spoken. "He is entirely right," she said, her eyes locked on Ryan. Ryan turned toward her, his expression startled. "Ma'am, please allow the working crew to handle this matter." "I am allowing you," Margaret said, her voice dropping an octave. "I am also watching you." A murmur of agreement rippled through the front rows. It was not loud, it was not dramatic, but it was enough to let Ryan know the room had shifted, that his authority was no longer absolute. Tyler Prescott took 2 steps forward into the cabin, his thin smile completely gone now. Come on, Tyler said, letting out a sharp, irritated laugh. This is getting completely ridiculous. It is one single seat, man. Nathan turned his eyes toward him, his expression completely neutral. Then sit in yours, Nathan said. The sentence landed with a physical force. Tyler's face turned a mottled red, his fists clenching at his sides. You do not know who I am, do you? Tyler said, his voice rising, breaking the low hum of the aircraft. Nathan looked at him for 2 seconds, his mind tracking back through 20 years of boardrooms, where men exactly like Tyler had mistaken silence for weakness. That may be true, Nathan said softly, but I know where you are assigned to sit. The businessman in row 2 let out a sharp breath, almost a laugh, then caught himself under his wife's warning touch. Ryan's tone hardened into something cold and sharp. Mr. Whitmore, if you refuse to cooperate with crew instructions, this may result in a significant delay for the entire flight. Nathan heard the words for exactly what they were. It was not information. It was pressure. It was the old, familiar tactic of making the person being mistreated feel responsible for the chaos caused by the people mistreating him. They wanted to turn the room against him. They wanted to make his dignity look like petty selfishness. He had seen it in corporate negotiations where fair demands were called difficult. He had seen it in rooms where obedience was dressed up as courtesy. Nathan folded his hands calmly in his lap. If the flight is delayed because you are attempting to remove me from my confirmed seat for another passenger's personal preference, that will not be my decision, Nathan said. Ryan's jaw set hard. Sir, I strongly recommend you reconsider your stance. Nathan did not move an inch. I strongly recommend you check your policy, Nathan said. The silence that followed was heavier than the gray sky outside the window. Emily Parker shifted her weight from one foot to the other, her fingers trembling against her tablet, her eyes darting toward the cockpit door. Tyler Prescott pulled out his phone, his thumbs flying across the screen with a done depth, childish anger. Margaret Ellis leaned slightly across the aisle toward Nathan. You are doing just fine, she whispered softly. Nathan turned his head just enough to meet her eyes. Thank you, he said. Those 2 words carried a weight nobody else understood because Nathan did not need a savior. But every human being deserves a witness. And sometimes one honest voice in a room full of hesitation is the only thing that keeps a wrong action from becoming standard procedure. Ryan turned sharply and stepped back behind a blue curtain, pulling Emily with him. Their hushed voices rose and fell against the metal walls of the galley. Tyler followed them into the small space, his voice an angry hiss. Nathan watched the curtain flutter, his face remaining entirely still, but inside something old and cold had been touched. It was that deep, lingering disappointment that comes when the world reminds you that respect is often treated as a conditional currency, offered freely to some and demanded as proof from others. Then the galley curtain moved again. Ryan returned, but he was no longer alone. A man in a dark airport authority blazer stepped onto the aircraft, his polished silver badge catching the bright overhead cabin lights. The conversation was no longer about a seat allocation, and Nathan knew it before the man even reached row 1. The man in the airport authority blazer stepped into first class like he had already decided how the story would end. His silver-bordered badge caught the sharp fluorescent light of the cabin as he stopped directly beside seat 1A. His name tag read Calvin Reed. He was in his mid-40s, clean-shaven, with salt and pepper hair at his temples and a face trained to remain entirely neutral under pressure, but his eyes gave him away. They moved rapidly across the small space, scanning Nathan Whitmore, Emily Parker, Ryan Brooks, and finally Tyler Prescott, who was hovering near the edge of the galley curtain. Not once did Calvin ask to see a boarding pass first. He simply looked down at Nathan, his hands resting on his utility belt. Mr. Whitmore, Calvin said, his voice flat, professional, and entirely clear. Nathan looked up from his lap. That is correct, he said. Calvin gave a small, practiced smile that did not even come close to reaching his eyes. My name is Calvin Reed, and I am the ground operations supervisor for this flight. We are trying to resolve a minor seating discrepancy before our scheduled departure time. Nathan rested his hand flat on top of his briefcase beneath the seat. There is no seating discrepancy from my side, Nathan said. His voice was low, controlled, and perfectly steady. Calvin nodded slowly, his head moving in a deliberate, patronizing rhythm, like an adult humoring a difficult child. I understand your position, sir, Calvin said. Do you? Nathan asked. The question was sharp. It cut right through the supervisor's smooth delivery. A few more passengers in row 2 raised their heads. Tyler Prescott stepped an inch closer from the galley, his fingers curling tightly around his smartphone. Calvin's smile held, but his jaw tightened. Sir, we have an elite tier member who travels with our airline frequently, Calvin said, his eyes locking onto Nathan. There seems to be a specific service expectation attached to this front row position today. To avoid any further operational disruption, we are asking you one final time to relocate to another available seat within the first class cabin. One final time. The phrase hung heavy in the cool air. It carried a clear threat without ever admitting it was a threat. Emily Parker stood just behind Ryan Brooks, her lips pressed so tightly together they turned white. She looked less certain than she had 5 minutes ago, but her uncertainty had not made her any braver. Nathan reached down, picked up his boarding pass, and held it out in the space between them. Calvin glanced down at the paper. It was a quick look, just enough to acknowledge its existence, but not enough to actually verify the details. Seat 1A, Nathan said, his voice dropping into a quiet, absolute register. Confirmed. Paid in full. Scanned at the gate by your agent. Yes, sir, Calvin said, his voice hardening. Nobody is saying you do not possess a valid travel document. Then why are you asking me to move? Nathan asked. The first class cabin went completely dead silent. The steady hum of the air conditioning vents felt louder now, pressing against everyone's ears. Somewhere far back in the economy section, a young child let out a short cry and then stopped. A woman near row 3 whispered something under her breath to her husband. Calvin leaned forward slightly, invading Nathan's personal space by a fraction of an inch. Mr. Whitmore, refusing to comply with crew and ground staff instructions can create significant complications, Calvin warned. We do not want this situation to escalate any further. Nathan did not blink. His eyes stayed locked on the supervisor's face. What exactly would escalation look like? Nathan asked. Calvin paused, his chest rising and falling with a slow, heavy breath. If necessary, sir, we may have to ask you to step off the aircraft entirely, so this matter can be discussed properly at the gate desk. There it was. Soft words masking a hard, ugly meaning. Removal. Public humiliation. A grown man being marched down the jet bridge in front of an entire cabin because he refused to surrender the piece of dignity he had rightfully purchased. Margaret Ellis sat forward sharply in seat 1B, her knitting needles clattering against the metal armrest. That is absolutely outrageous, she said. Her voice carried across the row, clear and entirely devoid of fear. Calvin turned his head toward her immediately. Ma'am, please remain seated and allow us to handle our procedures. I am seated, Margaret said, her eyes flashing with an unmistakable fire, and I am listening to every single word. Her voice was not raised. It did not shake. That made it 10 times stronger. A man in row 2 raised his hand halfway into the aisle, his face set in a firm frown. I saw his boarding pass when we entered, the man called out. The gentleman is completely right. Why not put the other passenger in his assigned seat in row 3? Tyler Prescott snapped his head toward row 2, his cheeks turning a bright, angry red. This matter does not concern you, Tyler barked. The man's wife looked frightened by the sudden outburst and touched her husband's arm, but the man did not take his off the supervisor. It concerns every single person in this cabin if the airline can just move people around because someone complains loud enough, he said. Calvin's jaw tightened until a small muscle twitched near his ear. Sir, please do not interfere with our flight preparation, Calvin said, his voice rising. Nathan felt the cabin shifting. It was a subtle, complicated movement. Some passengers completely avoided eye contact, staring intensely at their laps or their screens. They just wanted the plane to push back from the gate. They were annoyed by the delay and did not care who was right or wrong. That was human nature. Discomfort often asks justice to hurry up so it can stay comfortable. But other people were watching clearly now. They saw the injustice for exactly what it was. Calvin turned back to face Nathan, his professional mask slipping down to reveal a cold, administrative anger. "Mr. Whitmore, will you move to seat 3C? "No," Nathan said. The answer was immediate. It was quiet. It was final. Calvin inhaled a sharp breath through his teeth. "Sir, I need you to think very carefully about your next choice." "I have," Nathan said. Calvin stepped a half-inch closer. "This is your final opportunity to resolve this matter peacefully." Nathan's voice dropped even lower, but it carried an authority that cut through the space like a gavel hitting a wooden block. "Peacefully does not mean quietly accepting something that is fundamentally wrong," Nathan said. The words struck the cabin hard. Emily Parker looked down at the floorboards. Ryan Brooks shifted his weight from one foot to the other. Tyler Prescott muttered a curse word under his breath, his anger now completely open and childish. "Unbelievable," Tyler said, looking around the cabin for support. Nathan turned his eyes toward him. "What exactly is unbelievable, Mr. Prescott?" Nathan asked. Tyler froze for half a second. He had not expected his actual name to be used so cleanly in public. "That you are making all this unnecessary drama over one seat," Tyler said, crossing his arms tighter. Nathan nodded once, his expression perfectly controlled. "A seat you are also making drama over," Nathan said. Tyler's face burned a deep crimson. "I fly with this airline every single week," he said, his voice shaking with sudden sharp edge. Nathan leaned forward slightly, his eyes never leaving Tyler's face. "Then you should know exactly how seat assignments work," Nathan said. The businessman in row 2 let out another short, quiet breath. Margaret's lips tightened into a small line, almost a smile, but her eyes remained sad. She had lived through too many moments in American history to enjoy the sharpness of the confrontation. Calvin Reed's administrative patience completely vanished. "Mr. Whitmore, I am going to ask you to step out into the jet bridge with me now," Calvin said, his voice dropping into a hard, threatening register. "No," Nathan said. Ryan Brooks took a step forward, his hand moving slightly. "Sir," he started. Nathan raised his right hand. It was not an aggressive motion. It was a small, precise gesture, just enough to stop the former right in its tracks. "I am not threatening anyone on this crew," Nathan said, his voice cutting through the cabin like a blade. "I am not delaying this aircraft. I am not refusing a single safety instruction. I am sitting quietly in the seat printed on my valid boarding pass. If you choose to remove me for doing that, please make sure your official paperwork says exactly that." The entire first-class cabin went completely silent. It was a heavy, suffocating silence because the truth, once spoken clearly, leaves people with absolutely nowhere left to hide. Calvin Reed looked around the cabin, and for the first time, he actually noticed the smartphones. 3 of them were angled directly toward him. A woman near row 3 had her device resting on her lap, the lens pointed straight at his badge. The man in row 2 held his phone openly now, not recording with any dramatic movement, but simply preserving the exact words being spoken. For the first time since he had stepped onto Flight 447, Calvin seemed to calculate the consequences. He was not calculating fairness. He was calculating exposure. Calvin straightened his dark blazer, his fingers fumbling slightly with the fabric. "Very well," he said, his voice clipped and entirely cold. "Stay in your seat, sir. We will make alternate operational arrangements." Tyler Prescott's head snapped toward him in complete disbelief. "Are you serious right now?" Tyler demanded. Calvin did not answer him. He turned on his heel and walked straight back toward the galley, the small wall of uniforms breaking apart behind him. Ryan Brooks stepped back. Emily Parker moved aside, her eyes fixed on her tablet. Nathan remained exactly where he was, his hands folded in his lap. He had won the seat, but nobody in that cabin mistook the moment for peace. The heavy metallic click of the front cabin door closing did not bring relief to Flight 447. It sounded cold. It sounded final. Nathan Whitmore kept his eyes fixed on the gray runway outside as the giant aircraft began its slow pushback from the terminal gate. Rain continued to streak across the glass pane in long, jagged silver lines. Beneath the wings, the heavy rumble of the engines deepened, causing a low, steady vibration to rattle through the floorboards and into the wide leather base of Seat 1A. Inside the first-class cabin, the atmosphere remained completely brittle. The earlier I shouted and stopped, but the silence that replaced it felt thick, uncomfortable, and heavy with unspoken judgment. Nobody spoke above a whisper. Passengers turned pages of their magazines with careful, deliberate movements, their eyes occasionally darting toward row one and then quickly away. The humiliation did not disappear just because the ground supervisor had retreated. It lingered in the cool air like smoke, settling into the chest of everyone who had watched a man get pushed to the edge of removal simply because of how he was dressed. 2 rows back, Tyler Prescott dropped heavily into seat 3C. He did not attempt to conceal his raw irritation. He shoved his sleek black rolling suitcase under the seat structure in front of him with an aggressive kick, his jaw clenching tightly as he muttered to the middle-aged businessman sitting across the aisle from him. "Unbelievable," Tyler growled, his voice carrying straight through the quiet space. All of that drama over one single front row seat. The businessman gave a weak, superficial smile, the kind of look people give when they want absolutely no trouble near their personal space, but he kept his mouth shut. Nathan heard the comment cleanly. He did not turn his head to look. He sat perfectly still, his long fingers wrapped around the armrest, his breathing measured and completely controlled. This was often the hardest part of experiencing an injustice in public. The insult did not end when the crew stepped away. It stayed in the room, shifting the weight of the air, forcing the person who was wronged to carry the burden of being calm while everyone else remained comfortable. Emily Parker emerged from the front galley curtain carrying a silver tray with ice-filled glasses of pre-flight water. Her hands were perfectly steady, but the polished corporate mask she had worn 5 minutes ago had lost its pristine shine. Her cheeks still carried a pale, nervous flush as she stopped directly beside Nathan's row. She lowered the tray slightly, her eyelashes flickering as she avoided making direct eye contact with his dark eyes. "Water, Mr. Whitmore?" she asked, her voice dropping into a soft, hesitant murmur. Nathan looked up at her slowly, his expression entirely neutral. "No bourbon today, Emily?" Nathan asked. The question was delivered quietly, without an ounce of sarcasm or anger, but it made her throat move as she swallowed hard. "I am deeply sorry, sir," she whispered, her fingers tightening around the edge of the tray. "We will begin our full beverage service once the aircraft reaches its safe cruising altitude." Nathan studied the small creases of stress around her eyes for a brief second. He saw the genuine embarrassment now. It was not enough to undo the wrong she had committed, but it proved she finally understood she had crossed a line. "Water is perfectly fine," Nathan said. She placed the glass down on his tray table with careful precision. "Thank you, sir," she muttered before quickly moving to the next row. Across the narrow aisle, Margaret Ellis watched the young flight attendant disappear behind the blue fabric curtain. She turned her head toward Nathan, her silver hair catching the amber glow of the reading lights above. "I am so sorry you had to endure that unnecessary performance," she said, her voice low and steady. Nathan turned his head to meet her gaze, his fingers resting around the cold glass of water. "You did not cause the problem, Margaret," he replied softly. "No," she said, her thin fingers pressing against her woven scarf. "But I have lived through too many decades in this country where good people stayed silent when they should have spoken up. It makes the wrong thing look normal." Nathan absorbed the sentence in silence. It landed deeper in his mind than any of the supervisor's threats had. Her hands were thin, with prominent blue veins rising beneath her pale skin, and a simple silver wedding band sat loose on her ring finger. She possessed the quiet, weathered kindness of a person who had buried loved ones, forgiven mistakes, and still believed basic human decency was worth defending. "My husband was a high school principal for 34 consecutive years," Margaret said, a soft smile appearing at the corners of her mouth. "He used to stand in the morning assembly and tell our students that rules only carry true meaning when they protects the person with the least amount of power in the room. Otherwise, they are just tools for bullying." "That is an extraordinary lesson," Nathan said, his voice warm. Margaret gave a firm, slow nod. "It cost him his position once or twice," she said, "but he never regretted a single day of it." The aircraft paused at the edge of the main taxiway. The heavy roar of the jet engines suddenly deepened into a loud, ground-shaking thrum. The lights in the cabin dimmed for departure. The entire fuselage began to tremble as the plane pulled onto the center of the dark pavement. Nathan leaned his head back against the leather cushion. He had spent his entire adult life learning the art of absolute control. Control his tone, control his face, control the natural anger that other men were allowed to display freely in public spaces without consequence. He understood the immense structural burden of remaining calm when calm was the furthest thing from what he actually felt inside his chest. The engines roared into a deafening cascade of power. The aircraft surged forward down the long strip of concrete. Rain streaked across the glass window in straight, violent lines as the runway lights blurred into a solid wall of yellow. The cabin pressed everyone firmly back into their leather seats. For 40 seconds, the entire first-class section remained completely silent in the shared, fragile vulnerability of takeoff. Then, the nose lifted. The heavy wheels left the ground. Dallas fell away beneath the low clouds, leaving nothing but an endless blanket of dark gray. Nathan opened his eyes. He should have felt a sense of personal victory for keeping his seat. He did not. All he could focus on was how quickly a confirmed pay contract had become negotiable the moment the right kind of privileged passenger wanted it. He thought about how smoothly the administrative language of operational needs had been used to dress up an act of raw prejudice. He thought about how easily the supervisor had shifted from service to public threat, and most importantly, how many other ordinary passengers had moved to the back of the plane in the past because they did not possess the specific resources, the level of confidence, or the verbal legal training to say no. That thought stayed in his mind, sharp and cold. He was not thinking about himself anymore. He was thinking about the widow traveling alone on her savings, the young military veteran who survived a war but hated public confrontation, the grandmother who saved her money for a single first-class ticket to visit her family only to be treated like an intruder. Nathan opened his briefcase. He pulled out a slim, dark folder marked Blue Ridge Airways. His thumb rested on the edge of their software renewal contract. A big decision was not an act of revenge when it came from a place of absolute clarity, and absolute clarity was arriving now. Nathan began to think like the man Blue Ridge Airways did not realize they had just publicly humiliated. The system was about to change. The scratch of a black ink pen against a small notepad was the only sound Nathan Whitmore made for the next 20 minutes, as Flight 447 climbed through the turbulent gray clouds. He held a small leather-bound notebook on his lap, his hand moving with measured surgical precision. He wrote down every single detail while the memory was completely fresh. He noted the exact time of the incident at gate C-17. He recorded the flight number, the seat assignment of 1A, and the exact names emblazoned on the crew badges. Emily Parker, Ryan Brooks, Calvin Reed, Tyler Prescott. He did not write with anger. He wrote with the cold, administrative focus of a man preparing a legal brief. Beside each name, he recorded the exact phrases they had used against him. We need you to switch seats. Frequent VIP flyer. Operational needs. Final opportunity. Step off the aircraft. Each line of text stripped the emotion from the event, transforming a public sea nuke into a documented record of corporate liability. Documentation had saved his company more than once in the past. It had protected his engineers from predatory client demands, and it would protect the truth today. Across the narrow aisle, Margaret Ellis watched his pen move with a quiet, reverent curiosity. She did not lean over to read his words, choosing instead to offer him the dignity of private space. The light inside the cabin began to shift from a pale yellow to a deep, warm amber as the aircraft leveled out at 32,000 feet. The steady, heavy hum of the engines became a distant background thrum. Emily Parker stepped back into the first-class cabin, her hands holding a small tray with a fresh white cloth napkin. She stopped directly at row 1, her breathing shallow as she forced herself to meet Nathan's steady gaze. "Would you care for anything else to drink, Mr. Whitmore?" she asked, her voice entirely stripped of its earlier condescension. Nathan looked up from his notepad, his expression perfectly controlled. "No, thank you, Emily," he said softly. She paused for half a second, her lips parting as if she wanted to say something else, perhaps an apology or an explanation for her behavior, but the words seemed to fail her. She simply nodded once and moved quickly down the aisle, her heels tapping a frantic rhythm against the carpeted floor. Fear had a distinct sound in a corporate environment. It was the sound of silence when courage was actually required. Nathan closed his small notebook and slid it back into the front pocket of his briefcase. He pulled the slim blue folder marked Blue Ridge Airways back onto his lap. His thumb rested firmly on the edge of the Master Services Agreement. This contract governed the entire relationship between Whitmore Systems and the airline. It was due for a major renewal in less than 3 months. For the last 5 years, Nathan's engineering teams had gone above and beyond what the written contract actually required. When Blue Ridge experienced a major system backlog or a crew scheduling emergency on a holiday weekend, Whitmore Systems developers routinely answered the phone at 2 in the morning to fix the code. They did it out of mutual respect, providing custom priority escalations that were never officially built into the baseline price. But respect, Nathan now realized with absolute clarity, was an asset Blue Ridge only utilized when it was convenient for their bottom line. Tyler Prescott's voice suddenly carried forward from row 3, breaking through the quiet cabin. "Make it a double bourbon," he told Ryan Brooks, his voice carrying that familiar, unearned note of authority. "And make sure it is from the premium cart this time. I have never experienced that kind of resistance on a flight before. I expect a full corporate follow-up by tomorrow morning." Ryan's smooth voice responded instantly from the aisle. "Of course, Mr. Prescott. We deeply apologize for the inconvenience to your travel today. We will make sure customer relations contacts your executive office directly upon landing." Nathan heard every single word. Inconvenience. That was the word they used for Tyler Prescott because he held a platinum executive tier status card. Nathan had been threatened with federal removal simply because he wore a plain gray t-shirt and chose to stand his ground. The structural bias of the airline was not a minor customer service mistake. It was an operational policy that rewarded privilege over human dignity. Nathan opened his laptop screen, the bright white glow reflecting off his calm, weathered face. He connected his device to the high-speed cabin network and opened an encrypted communication channel to Daniel Harper, his chief operating officer back in San Diego. Nathan's fingers moved rapidly across the keyboard. His message is short, sharp, and controlled. "Pull every active services agreement we currently maintain with Blue Ridge Airways," Nathan typed. "I want the complete map of our technical support obligations, the priority response clauses, the maintenance logging terms, and the exact expiration dates for every single operational platform we manage for them." On the other end of the screen, the cursor blinked for 3 seconds before Daniel's response appeared. "All files are being compiled now," Daniel wrote. "I will have the complete technical summary ready for your review before we land." "Is everything all right on the flight, Nathan?" Nathan stared at the screen for a brief second before typing his reply. "We are fulfilling our contract," Nathan wrote. "Nothing less. And from this moment forward, nothing more." The clarity of his decision settled deep into his chest, replacing the lingering fatigue of the confrontation with a cold, controlled purpose. He looked out the window one final time as the sun began to set over the western horizon, casting a long streak of brilliant crimson across the tops of the clouds. Nathan knew his company's platforms were the hidden spine keeping Blue Ridge Airways in the air. Their developers managed the precise logic that matched pilots to cockpits and flight attendants to cabins every single morning. If Whitmore Systems stopped providing the unwritten, voluntary shortcuts that kept their operational system stable during weather delays, Blue Ridge would begin to experience massive backlogs within 48 hours. It was not an act of revenge or anger. It was a strict realignment of boundaries. Nathan closed his laptop and slid it cleanly into his leather briefcase as the captain's voice crackled through the cabin speakers, announcing their initial descent into the San Diego area. The first-class cabin began to prepare for arrival. Seatbacks were clicked into their upright positions. Metal tray tables were stowed away with sharp clicks. Nathan looked across the aisle at Margaret Ellis, who was carefully tucking her knitting needles back into her bag. "Thank you for speaking up back in Dallas, Margaret." Nathan said quietly, his voice warm. Margaret turned her head, her soft gray eyes meeting his with a steady, peaceful smile. You did not need my help, mister. Whitmore, she said, her voice dropping below the roar of the descending engines. You knew exactly who you were the entire time. But nobody should have to stand alone when a system tries to make them feel small. Remember that. Nathan noticed once, the simple power of her words staying with him as the aircraft broke through the low coastal clouds, revealing the bright, scattered lights of San Diego blinking awake beside the dark Pacific water. The rubber wheels of Flight 447 struck the dark concrete of the San Diego runway with a loud, heavy screech that vibrated through the entire floorboards of the aircraft. Nathan Whitmore did not stretch his legs or join the sudden rush of passengers reaching for their overhead personal items the moment the seatbelt sign chimed its release. He sat perfectly still in seat 1A, his leather briefcase already pulled securely onto his lap, his eyes watching the terminal lights blur past his dark window pane. The first-class cabin was alive with the restless, metallic sounds of clicks, opening bins, and the shallow, hurried breathing of travelers eager to escape the tight space. Across the aisle, Margaret Ellis stood up slowly, her thin hand resting on the edge of the leather headrest for physical balance as the crowd began to bottleneck near the exit door. She looked down at Nathan, her gray eyes carrying that soft, unmistakable warmth of an honest witness. You did exactly the right thing today, mister. Whitmore, she said, her voice dropping below the ambient rustle of the departing cabin. Nathan rose from his seat, lifting his briefcase with a controlled movement, and gave her a small, respectful nod. So did you, Margaret, he said quietly. Her face softened, a brief flash of sadness touching her eyes. I only wish more people possessed the courage to speak before the damage is already finalized, she whispered, before turning to join the slow line down the jet bridge. The cool coastal air of San Diego hit Nathan the exact second he stepped out of the aircraft's pressurized fuselage, carrying a faint scent of ocean salt and jet fuel. He walked down the terminal corridors with a measured, unhurried stride, bypassing the bright neon signs of baggage claim and heading directly toward the private vehicle lane outside. His personal driver, Charles, a broad-shouldered man of 58 with a calm, weathered face, stood waiting beside a sleek black sedan, his hand already resting on the rear door handle. Good evening, Mr. Whitmore, Charles said, his warm voice instantly cutting through the noisy traffic of the arrival's curb. How was your flight back from Dallas? Nathan paused near the edge of the concrete walkway, his eyes catching the distant reflection of a Blue Ridge Airways logo glowing softly against the main terminal glass structure. We landed safely, Charles, Nathan said, his tone flat and carefully measured. Charles caught the specific edge in his boss's voice. His friendly smile faded by a fraction of an inch as he gave a firm nod. Yes, sir, he said, holding the door open. On the 20-minute ride toward the downtown district, Nathan did not open his email application. He did not answer the text notifications flashing on his screen. He sat in the darkened rear seat, watching the city headlights move past him in long, silent streaks of white and red, his mind locked onto a singular operational reality. By 6:30 the very next morning, the glass front building of the Whitmore Systems corporate headquarters was already catching the sharp golden light of the California sunrise. The main lobby smelled faintly of fresh coffee grounds and industrial floor polish as Nathan walked past the security desk. The guard on duty, Luis, looked up from his computer monitor and instantly straightened his posture. Good morning, Mr. Whitmore, Luis called out. Nathan stopped for a brief second, his eyes fixing on the guard's face. Good morning, Luis, Nathan replied, his voice low and incredibly controlled. We are going to be making some significant administrative decisions today. Luis nodded his head slowly, not understanding the exact context of the statement, but feeling the immense structural weight behind his boss's tone. Understood, sir, Luis said, his hand moving to clear the executive elevator path. On the top floor, the main conference room was already fully illuminated. Daniel Harper, the chief operating officer, stood near the far end of the long mahogany table, his laptop open, his sleeves rolled up to his forearms, and a series of paper folders arranged in perfect, meticulous stacks. Daniel was 45, sharp-eyed and fiercely loyal in the quiet manner of a man who did not require many words to execute a directive. He had worked beside Nathan for 11 consecutive years. He knew exactly when his boss was angry, and more importantly, he knew that Nathan's anger never moved with a loud or frantic pace. That was precisely what made it dangerous to encounter.
Did you sleep at all?
Daniel asked, pointing toward a fresh carafe of water. No, Nathan said, taking his seat at the head of the table without touching the glass. Daniel nodded his head once, his fingers tapping the first dark blue folder on the stack. Blue Ridge Airways, Daniel said, his voice dropping into a clean, professional register. This is their current master services agreement. It remains active through the end of the current fiscal year, with their official technical renewal discussions scheduled to begin this August. As you know, our software platforms provide their entire operational spine. We manage their crew scheduling lodge, their workforce maintenance logs, their workforce networks, their real-time delay analytics, and their executive reporting dashboard. Nathan looked down at the documents, his fingers tracing the edge of the paper structure. What is our contracted support obligation level? Nathan asked. Daniel shifted his glasses. The written contract specifies standard baseline support plus discretionary priority handling for critical operational emergencies, Daniel explained. Nathan looked up, his eyes narrowing into cold points of focus. Discretionary, Nathan repeated. Daniel exhaled a slow, heavy breath. Yes, meaning our engineering teams have routinely given them much faster turnaround times than the written contract actually demands.
How much faster?
Nathan pressed. For any high-priority ticket involving crew logistics, our people usually jump on it in under 2 hours, Daniel said. The written contract actually allows us up to 1 full business day to respond, unless a total system outage is officially confirmed by their technical director. Nathan closed the blue folder with a sharp, decisive snap that echoed cleanly through the empty conference room. Start the conversations with the other carriers, Nathan said, his voice dead level. Daniel's eyebrows lifted in immediate surprise. You mean Pacific Union, North Star Air, Mesa Continental? Daniel asked, his pen hovering over his notepad. All 3 of them have been circling our office for the past 2 years, waiting for us to have technical capacity available. 2 of them are direct competitors to Blue Ridge. Nathan leaned back into his leather chair, his hands folding calmly on his lap. Start the introductory calls this morning, Nathan said. Daniel sat down slowly, his eyes studying his boss's calm face, looking for any trace of reckless emotion. Nathan, before I execute that order, I have to ask, Daniel said carefully.
Is this sudden shift about what transpired on your flight back from Dallas?
Nathan looked through the large glass wall of the conference room, his eyes scanning the quiet engineering floor, where rows of young developers and senior system analysts were beginning to arrive at their workstations under the soft white lights. It is about what the flight revealed, Nathan said softly. They possessed every proper document. They had my paid ticket. They had the green scan from the gate agent. They had the confirmed seat assignment of 1A. Yet, the moment a passenger they valued more wanted what I had rightfully purchased, their entire crew looked for a way to make me disappear. They turned their authority into a weapon of convenience. Daniel did not ask for further details. His face hardened as he typed the initial instructions into his tablet. We are not breaking the written contract, Nathan continued, his voice remaining cool, sharp, and entirely controlled. We are not retaliating illegally, and we are not being reckless with our business. We will meet every single written obligation we signed with Blue Ridge Airways. Nothing less. He paused, his dark eyes locking onto his officer's face. And absolutely nothing more, Nathan said. Daniel gave a firm, slow nod. That will disrupt their operational stability during the next weather delay, Daniel noted. Nathan did not blink. It will simply teach them the exact structural difference between a service they actually earned and a premium service they merely assumed they were entitled to receive for free, Nathan said. The first domino had been officially touched, and somewhere across the country, inside the executive offices of Blue Ridge Airways, nobody realized the balance of power had already begun to shift. By 2 o'clock that afternoon, The central glass wall of the main conference room had become a literal map of corporate consequences. The names of major aviation companies filled the smooth surface in bold black marker lines. Arrows drawn with sharp geometric precision connected technical support teams, system deployment dates, and tiered contract levels. Blue Ridge Airways sat circled near the middle of the configuration, marked once, then twice, not with an outburst of emotional anger, but with absolute analytical accuracy. Nathan Whitmore stood before the glass with his blazer removed, his gray t-shirt sleeves rolled slightly higher, his hand calmly holding the marker while his executive team studied the board in total silence. "We are not punishing this organization," Nathan said, his low voice carrying a cold weight through the room. Nobody interrupted his delivery. "We are simply correcting a long-standing operational imbalance," Nathan continued. "For too many years, Blue Ridge has received a level of technical support they never actually paid for because we mistakenly believed our corporate relationship was built on a foundation of mutual respect." Daniel Harper looked up from the master service chart, his pen resting flat against his chin. "And now?" Daniel asked. Nathan capped the black marker with a sharp click. "Now we follow the paper," Nathan said. The room remained completely motionless. That was the exact kind of sentence that sounded deceptively small until a room full of engineers fully understood the massive structural implications behind it. Whitmore Systems had never been careless or lazy with Blue Ridge Airways. Their senior developers had spent countless late nights answering emergency calls from the Charlotte headquarters. Their project managers had routinely adjusted internal timelines to accommodate sudden airline requests. Their system analysts had caught critical database errors before the airline leadership even realized those problems existed. None of that labor was written into the official contract terms. It was the voluntary layer of protection that naturally came from a deep place of professional respect. And that respect, Nathan now understood with absolute clarity, had been treated as a worthless commodity by the airline crew. At 2:15 that exact afternoon, Daniel Harper placed 3 separate telephone calls. The first call went directly to the Director of Operations at Pacific Union Air. The second call went to the technical lead at North Star Air. The third call went straight to the executive office of Mesa Continental. Daniel did not sound rushed or frantic. He did not mention the name of Blue Ridge Airways once during the discussions. He simply stated that due to recent structural relocations, Whitmore Systems might have a limited amount of technical engineering capacity available for a new aviation partner in the upcoming quarter. Every single telephone call changed its tone within 2 minutes. The operational director at Pacific Union asked how soon they could fly to San Diego to schedule an immediate technical systems review. The technical lead at North Star requested a full corporate pricing model by Friday afternoon. The executive at Mesa Continental went a step further, requesting a private face-to-face meeting with Nathan himself by the end of the week. By 4 o'clock, Daniel walked back into Nathan's private corner office, his fingers holding his digital tablet tightly. "They are incredibly interested," Daniel said, stopping beside the dark, wooden desk. Nathan looked up from his computer screen, his expression completely neutral. "How interested?" Nathan asked. The operational director at Pacific Union stated, "They have been waiting over 2 consecutive years for our engineering teams to have available capacity," Daniel explained. Nathan leaned back into his wide leather chair, his fingers interlocking calmly on his lap. "Do not finalize any commitments with them just yet," Nathan said softly. "Let the baseline process move forward naturally." Daniel hesitated for a split second, his hand tightening around his tablet casing. "You know the technical staff at Blue Ridge will notice this shift almost immediately, Nathan." Nathan looked through his large glass office wall toward the main engineering floor, watching his young developers type lines of code beneath the steady white lights. These were the people who had sacrificed their personal weekends to keep an airline stable while passengers never even knew their names. "They should notice," Nathan said cleanly. 3 days later, the first structural ripple officially hit the airline network. The first telephone call arrived from a regional operations manager based at the Denver hub. His name was Kevin Malone, and his voice carried the thin, breathless panic of a corporate employee trying desperately not to sound terrified in front of a vendor. Daniel placed the call on speakerphone inside Nathan's office. "We have a significant crew pairing backlog building up here," Kevin said, the sound of keyboard clicks audible over the line. "Our automated pairing logic is moving slower than normal across 3 separate hubs, and our central maintenance dashboard is not updating its metrics as fast as usual. We officially opened a high-priority support ticket 40 minutes ago." Daniel checked the digital support queue on his monitor. "Yes, I see the ticket right here in our system, Kevin," Daniel said calmly. Kevin let out a quick, nervous breath. "Usually, when we open a ticket of this nature, someone from your engineering team is already inside our database fixing the logic by now," Kevin noted. Daniel's voice remained level, matching the distant hum of the office air vents. "Your current baseline support agreement specifies a standard response time within 1 full business day unless a total system outage is officially confirmed by your technical director," Daniel stated. There was a long, heavy pause on the other end of the line. "Right," Kevin said, his voice dropping an octave. "I understand that is the written term. But normally, your development team jumps on these logistics issues much faster to help us stay on schedule." "Normally," Daniel said, his eyes meeting Nathan's steady gaze across the desk, "we have additional discretionary capacity available to allocate. Today, our teams are fully occupied with other projects." Kevin breathed heavily into the phone receiver. "Are you officially telling me that Whitmore Systems no longer has capacity for our operational needs?" Kevin asked. "I am telling you that your current high priority request is sitting exactly in our digital queue according to your contract service tier," Daniel replied. Another pause followed, longer and tighter this time. "Is Nathan there?" Kevin asked, his tone turning desperate. Nathan sat perfectly still across from his officer, his face completely unblinking, his eyes fixed on the rain outside. He shook his head once. "Mr. Whitmore is currently unavailable," Daniel said into the speakerphone. Kevin tried to let out a casual laugh, but it came out completely dry. "Okay," Kevin said. "Well, can you at least flag this ticket as a critical issue if it qualifies under our operational parameters?" Daniel marked a line on his pad. "We will review the technical parameters," Daniel said. "If it qualifies, it will be prioritized. If it does not, it will be handled in its proper chronological order." The telephone call ended with polite corporate phrases and an unspoken fear that neither side named aloud. By Friday morning, the operational delays were no longer contained to a regional hub. Blue Ridge corporate headquarters officially reached out to San Diego. Their director of operations, Stephanie Cole, requested an immediate emergency video conference. Her electronic mail was careful, precise, and completely guarded. She utilized words like strategic alignment, core partnership, and service continuity. It was the exact kind of language executive leadership uses when a major system is beginning to fracture, but nobody wants the blame written down in ink. Nathan read the message once, then forwarded it straight to Daniel. "Send our standard response," Nathan said. Daniel typed the lines instantly. "We are fully fulfilling all current contractual obligations and look forward to reviewing any additional operational needs during our next scheduled renewal discussions." That single sentence hit the Blue Ridge corporate office like a locked iron door. Underneath the polite phrasing was a cold message they could not ignore. The balance had shifted, and the airline was completely unprepared for the cost of their choices. The cold amber glow of the conference room screen illuminated the quiet face of Stephanie Cole as she muted her microphone for the 4th time in 10 minutes. Behind her on the display sat 2 senior Blue Ridge Airways executives, their faces pale under the bright fluorescent lighting of their Charlotte corporate headquarters. Mark Delaney, the chief operating officer, rubbed his temples with a slow, frantic pressure, his eyes staring down at a cascading wall of red status alerts on his laptop. The airline's automated system was backing up. Crew schedules were fracturing across 5 separate hubs. Flights were delaying, and the one company that possessed the key to fixing the software architecture was refusing to answer their emergency shortcuts. Mark looked up, his voice tight over the digital link. "Mr. Whitmore, We are looking at 42 flight delays across our Eastern network right now, Mark said, his hand clenching around an expensive silver pen. Our internal scheduling modules are throwing database errors every time our staff tries to manually reallocate a pilot to a delayed cabin. Normally, your support desk overrides these synchronization issues within 15 minutes. Nathan Whitmore sat perfectly still at the head of his mahogany table, his navy blazer unbuttoned, his long fingers laced calmly together over his leather briefcase. He did not look at the clock. He did not look at the digital delay chart Stephanie was desperately trying to share on the screen. He kept his eyes locked on Mark Delaney's face, his dark eyes steady, cold, and entirely unblinking. Your support desk is currently receiving the exact service turnaround specified under Section 4 of our master agreement, Mr. Delaney, Nathan said softly. The written terms permit up to 1 full business day for synchronization diagnostic errors. Mark's face flushed a deep crimson, his pen clicking rapidly against the table. Tap, tap, tap. It was a shallow, desperate sound. Yes, I understand the written terms, Mr. Whitmore, Mark said, his voice rising by a fraction of an octave. But historically, Whitmore Systems has always treated Blue Ridge as a premium priority partner. We have had a mutual understanding for 5 consecutive years. If these database backlogs continue through the afternoon rush, it will cost our airline over $2.4 million in passenger rebooking vouchers and regulatory fines. Nathan leaned forward slightly, the white light from the monitor catching the hard lines of his jaw. Sometimes corporate partners mistake a voluntary courtesy for an entitlement, Mr. Delaney, Nathan said. The words fell into the quiet room like heavy iron weights. Stephanie Cole shifted her posture on the screen, her eyes darting toward her lap. She looked entirely sick to her stomach. She was a seasoned corporate director, and she understood exactly what that tone meant. It was the tone of a vendor who no longer cared about your volume because you had broken something far more valuable than a contract. Mr. Whitmore, Stephanie said, her voice dropping into a soft, hesitant murmur. We did not initiate this emergency call to debate the strict boundaries of our service level agreements. We initiated this call because we want to understand why our relationship changed so abruptly after last Wednesday. Nathan reached down into his leather briefcase with deliberate slowness. He did not pull out a legal brief or a software pricing sheet. He withdrew his small black leather-bound notebook, placing it flat on the mahogany wood. He opened it to the page containing his clean, surgical handwriting. Last Wednesday, Nathan said, his voice dropping into a low, controlled register that made every person in the San Diego room sit up completely straight. I boarded Blue Ridge Flight 447 from Dallas-Fort Worth to San Diego. I possessed a valid first-class ticket for Seat 1A. It was paid in full 3 weeks in advance. It was scanned green at the gate by your agent. I sat in my assigned row, placed my briefcase below, and prepared for my journey home. Nathan paused, letting the silence breathe for 3 full seconds. The silence on the digital link was absolute. Mark Delaney stared into his camera, his jaw slightly open, his hand freezing over his silver pen. Your lead flight attendant, Emily Parker, approached my row, Nathan continued, his eyes never leaving Mark's face. She demanded I vacate my seat to accommodate a platinum executive tier customer named Tyler Prescott. When I requested a valid operational reason, she lied about a clerical seating mix-up. When I refused to surrender my dignity for his personal preference, your senior attendant, Ryan Brooks, stepped into the aisle and used the threat of a flight delay to pressure me. When that failed, your ground operations supervisor, Calvin Reed, boarded the aircraft and threatened to have me forcibly removed from the plane by airport security. They spent 30 minutes trying to publicly humiliate a passenger simply because they looked at my gray t-shirt and decided I did not fit their specific image of first-class value. Stephanie Cole lowered her head completely, her eyes dropping as she stared at her keyboard, unable to maintain eye contact with the screen. Mark Delaney's face went entirely white, the gray skin around his eyes showing a profound sudden terror. The silver pen slipped from his fingers, clattering loudly against his desk. He looked like a man who had just watched his entire career dissolve into a pool of legal liability. Mr. Whitmore, Mark stammered, his smooth corporate voice cracking completely. I was completely unaware of this incident. The corporate executive office was never notified of a crew confrontation on Flight 447. That is precisely the structural problem, Mr. Delaney, Nathan said, his voice remaining sharp, cold, and entirely controlled. Your people did not report it because they believed it was standard operating procedure. They believed that forcing an ordinary passenger to shrink so that a privileged flyer can stay comfortable was just part of their job. They did not realize that the man sitting in seat 1A was the exact same man who designs the logistical architecture keeping their planes in the air. The difference is that on your aircraft, your employees assumed I possessed no power to fight back, so they treated my dignity like an inconvenience. Mark Delaney swallowed hard, his collar suddenly looking too tight for his throat. Mr. Whitmore, please understand that our airline does not tolerate discriminatory behavior from our frontline staff, Mark pleaded, his hands open on the desk. This is a severe customer service breakdown. We will launch an immediate internal investigation into the crew. No, Mr. Delaney, Nathan said cleanly, his voice slicing through the defensive corporate language. It was not a customer service breakdown. It was an institutional judgment. And you cannot fix a broken culture by simply punishing 3 people after a vendor forces you to look in the mirror. Stephanie Cole unmuted her microphone once more, her voice trembling slightly, but carrying a genuine note of clarity. You are right, Mr. Whitmore, she said softly. There is no excuse for how you were treated on that aircraft. On behalf of the operational leadership, I want to personally apologize to you, not just because of the database backlogs today. I am truly sorry that our organization made you feel like you did not belong in a space you rightfully earned. Nathan studied her face through the monitor for a long, quiet second. He saw the shift in her eyes. It was the first honest statement anyone from Blue Ridge Airways had delivered since Gate C-17. I appreciate the truth, Stephanie, Nathan said softly, but truth must carry real consequences. Otherwise, it is just marketing. He stood up from his chair, closing his black notebook with a sharp snap. We will fulfill our current written contract through its legal expiration date. Beyond that, Whitmore Systems is officially reallocating our senior engineering teams to partners who understand that respect is a baseline requirement, not a service upgrade. Nathan ended the digital call without another word, leaving the Blue Ridge leadership staring at a blank screen while the cascading red alerts continued to flash in the dark. The silence inside the top floor office of Whitmore Systems lasted for 3 full weeks before the next major piece of paper arrived. It came inside a thick cream-colored envelope delivered directly to the front desk by a bonded courier service. The corporate logo of Blue Ridge Airways was pressed into the upper corner in smooth gold ink. No electronic mail notification preceded it. No legal assistant had filtered the content through a series of administrative summaries. It was a physical letter. Nathan Whitmore stood behind his dark wooden desk, his rolled sleeves revealing the heavy tendons of his forearms as he picked up the envelope. Daniel Harper stood near the large window pane across the room, his arms tightly crossed over his chest, his eyes watching the rhythmic flow of traffic moving along the freeway far below. Daniel did not ask about the contents. He knew this specific kind of corporate silence. It was the silence that always arrived right before a massive structural realignment was finalized. Nathan broke the wax seal with a slow, steady stroke of his thumb. He unfolded the crisp white page. The letter was signed personally by Arthur Montgomery, the Chief Executive Officer of Blue Ridge Airways. The language was direct. It did not utilize the standard public relations phrases designed to deflect blame or minimize corporate liability. It explicitly acknowledged the severe behavioral violation that had occurred at Gate C-17. It stated that an immediate, comprehensive review of frontline training protocols had been initiated at the highest board level. And finally, it requested a private, personal meeting with Nathan at a time and location of his choosing to discuss a path toward organizational reconciliation. Nathan read the final paragraph twice, then placed the paper gently onto his desk surface. Daniel finally turned his head away from the window, his eyes narrowing slightly. Is it real? Daniel asked, his low voice cutting through the soft hum of the office air vents. Nathan walked toward the wide glass window, looking out at the San Diego coastline, stretching beneath a brilliant afternoon sky. The ocean water looked like blue steel under the bright sun. It is real enough to be written after they felt the financial sting of their own choices, Nathan said softly. Daniel stepped closer to the desk, his hand resting on the edge of the Blue Ridge operational folder. That does not make the apology completely meaningless, Nathan. No, Nathan said, his voice dropping into a deeper, slower register. But it does make it incomplete. It is easy to draft a beautiful letter when your master scheduling system is throwing database errors and your competitor is sitting in your vendor's waiting room. Real character is not defined by how fast you apologize when you are bleeding market capitalization. It is defined by how you treat a stranger when you think there are absolutely no consequences for your behavior. Nathan rested his hand against the glass pane, feeling the slight vibration of the city moving below. He thought about Margaret Ellis sitting across the narrow aisle on Flight 447. He remembered the calm fire in her eyes, the thin blue veins rising beneath her pale skin, and the steady weight of her voice as she broke the comfortable silence of the cabin to defend a stranger. He thought about Emily Parker, who had swallowed her own words because she was too terrified of losing her corporate priority status to exhibit an ounce of basic human courage. He thought about Ryan Brooks hiding behind the administrative lie of operational needs. He thought about Calvin Reed calculating exposure instead of fairness. And he thought about Tyler Prescott, a grown man who believed the world owed him an exclusive front row position simply because a plastic card had his name engraved on it. But Nathan's mind did not linger on the executives or the privileged flyers for long. He thought about the people who would never sit inside an executive conference room. He thought about the ordinary people who did not possess a multi-million-dollar software contract to use as leverage when a system chose to push them into a corner. He thought about the lonely widow traveling on her retirement savings, the young military veteran who survived a deployment but could not find the words to fight a uniform in public, the grandmother who saved for 6 months to purchase a single first-class ticket to visit her family, only to be treated like an intruder because of her accent or her clothes. Those were the people who usually moved to seat 3C without a word. Those were the people who spent the entire journey home staring out the window, wondering why an institution had made them feel so incredibly small. That was the real cost of corporate bias. It was the quiet erosion of human dignity when nobody was looking. 2 days later, Blue Ridge Airways issued a mandatory systemic update across their entire domestic employee network. The airline officially announced a complete overhaul of their passenger seating escalation protocols. The new policy strictly prohibited frontline staff or ground supervisors from requesting any passenger to surrender a confirmed premium seat assignment for non-savory reasons without an immediate review step by an independent operations director. The internal corporate memo did not utilize Nathan's name. It did not mention the specific confrontation on Flight 447. It did not have to. Inside the aviation industry, the message was delivered with absolute clarity. The dominoes were falling. Stephanie Cole requested a final telephone call with San Diego on Thursday morning. This time, she did not bring a legal team or a group of vice presidents to sit behind her on the monitor screen. She sat alone in a quiet office, her face looking tired but remarkably clear under the soft light. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, her voice dropping into an honest register that contained no marketing veneer. "I wanted to update you personally before our board meeting tomorrow afternoon. Emily Parker has officially submitted a complete written statement to our Human Resources Department. She admitted that she felt an intense systemic pressure to favor our highest tier frequent flyers, regardless of the ticketing rules. Ryan Brooks has been permanently removed from all premium cabin assignments pending a full operational review, and Calvin Reed is no longer authorized to manage passenger escalation procedures for our ground service teams." Nathan listened to her words in total silence, his face an unblinking mask of controlled attention. "And what about Tyler Prescott?" Nathan asked quietly. Stephanie looked down at her hands for a brief second before looking back into the camera lens. His elite executive status account has been officially suspended while our compliance team reviews 4 separate service complaints filed against him by other passengers over the past 12 months, she said. I know these administrative changes do not fix the indignity you experience on our aircraft, Mr. Whitmore. No, Nathan said, his voice level and flat. It does not. Stephanie accepted the sentence without offering a defensive corporate excuse. He respected her more for her silence in that moment. But I truly believe it will prevent our crew from doing the exact same thing to another passenger next week, she said softly. Nathan's expression softened for the very first time since Gate C-17. That, Stephanie, is exactly where real repair begins, Nathan said. The digital link disconnected quietly, leaving the room still and settled. The long battle for a single seat was over. Whitmore Systems did not renew the old master agreement under its original preferential terms. Blue Ridge Airways was permitted to compete for their technology services under a much stricter baseline contract with full market pricing and absolutely no informal courtesy upgrades. Pacific Union became Nathan's largest aviation client, with North Star Air following closely behind. The business world moved forward in its regular, chronological rhythm. But the lesson remained carved deep into the foundation of the industry, carrying a silent reminder that true power does not need to shout to be recognized. Sometimes it simply stays seated and waits for the system to correct itself. The warm coastal breeze of a late September evening carried the gentle hum of docking boats across the marina near the downtown San Diego Harbor District. Nathan Whitmore sat near a wide window panel at an upscale waterfront restaurant, his navy blazer resting neatly on the empty chair beside him. The low interior lighting of the dining room cast a soft golden glow over the polished silverware and crisp linen tablecloth. Outside, the dark harbor water rippled under the silver moonlight, mirroring the distant city skyline in broken streaks of white and yellow. Across the small wooden table sat Michael Bennett, his close friend from his college days at Ohio State, who now worked as a senior civil rights attorney in Los Angeles. Daniel Harper sat on Nathan's left, his posture perfectly relaxed for the first time in consecutive months, his fingers lightly circling a small glass of mineral water. They had spent the last hour dining in quiet comfort, talking about the successful completion of the Phoenix contract before Michael finally leaned forward, his hands flat against the table. All of that structural chaos because one young man could not bear to sit in his own assigned row, Michael said, shaking his head with a slow, heavy breath. Nathan looked down at his own water glass, his dark eyes catching the tiny reflections of the amber candle flame burning in the middle of the table. No, Michael, Nathan said, his voice dropping into that quiet, absolute register that instantly made the conversation feel smaller and more intimate. All of that structural chaos occurred because too many people inside that airline believed his personal comfort mattered far more than my basic human dignity. The table went completely dead silent for 3 seconds. Daniel lowered his eyes toward his plate, his jaw tightening as he remembered the initial technical backlogs they had forced Blue Ridge Airways to navigate. Michael gave a slow, serious nod, his experienced lawyer's mind fully understanding the deeper social reality behind his friend's statement. It was never truly about a front row seating configuration on an airplane, was it? Michael asked quietly. Nathan looked out the glass window toward the shifting harbor lights, his expression peaceful but entirely unyielding. No, Nathan said. It was about whether I would allow a broken system to teach me how to disappear. The weight of those words settled into the space between them, carrying the heavy truth of a man who had spent 49 years refusing to let the world dictate his worth based on appearances. Nathan did not carry the memory of Flight 447 as a weapon of angry revenge. He carried it as a permanent structural reminder. He had not used his immense corporate leverage to destroy Blue Ridge Airways. He had utilized his power to force them to build a better, more respectful environment for travelers who possessed no boardroom voice. True character is always revealed in the quiet moments when people in authority believe there will be no public consequences for their behavior. That was exactly where dignity was either actively protected or carelessly stripped away by bias. That was exactly where a simple choice at an airport gate became a mirror reflecting the hidden soul of an entire institution. Nathan had been underestimated by the lead attendant. He had been pressured by the senior crew member. He had been threatened with public removal by the ground supervisor. But he had stayed calm, perfectly still, and entirely certain of his own position. And by simply refusing to shrink, he had forced an entire corporation to open its eyes and see the invisible prejudice they had tolerated for decades. Nathan reached into the interior pocket of his blazer and withdrew his phone. He opened his personal messages and smiled faintly at a new notification that had arrived just 20 minutes earlier. It was an electronic update from Stephanie Cole at Blue Ridge Airways. The message contained a brief, attached video link showing the first live assembly of their new mandatory passenger equity training program in Charlotte. Over 400 frontline flight attendants and ground service supervisors were sitting in a large auditorium watching a slide presentation on implicit bias and human decency. The instructor on the stage was using the exact language from Nathan's black leather-bound notebook as a primary case study for systemic reform. They were teaching new hires how to ask the right questions before ever threatening a customer with removal. It was a complete culture reset, born from a single moment of quiet resistance in seat 1A. Nathan turned his phone screen off and slid it cleanly back into his pocket, his eyes catching the proud, steady look Daniel Harper was giving him across the table. The software contracts with Pacific Union Air and North Star Air were already running with flawless precision, bringing millions in fresh revenue to Vance Logistics, while ensuring their engineering teams were treated with total professional respect. The system had officially changed. The long journey that had begun with a cold glass of water and a ripped piece of paper at Dallas-Fort Worth was finally complete. Nathan took a deep breath of the cool harbor air, a profound sense of inner healing and quiet triumph settling into his chest as the distant sound of a ship's horn echoed softly across the dark water. If this dramatic story reminded you of the absolute importance of standing firm with your own dignity in a world full of systemic prejudice, please take one quick second to like this video right now. Your small action helps our content reach more people who need to find their own inner strength. Please subscribe to the channel immediately to ensure you never miss our next inspiring journey about justice, accountability, and the absolute triumph of human courage over corporate bias. We want to hear your voice and build a powerful community of witnesses together, so please leave a meaningful comment below right now using these 3 exact words. Respect everyone.